So we're talking about China and the current visit.
I want to bring in NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. Brian, I learned a lot since I've been down here. One of the things is that Apple is a company that many young people truly admire in China. They have Apple Watches, they have Apple iPads and iPhones. They think it is the gold standard when it comes to sort of personal computing. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons why Tim Cook is here. I'm sure there are many others. But
so, like I said earlier, the U.S. is bringing its strongest foot forward, bringing, the strength of our economy with our most prolific CEOs that are well known within the Chinese community, population, and sort of like, hey, if we work with you, you guys could be as awesome as us, right?
with Tim Cook and Elon Musk, it's clear the president wanted to bring people that not only are successful in their disciplines of business, but also people that the Chinese people know and respect.
Yeah, and Tom, you put it quite plainly, and I think appropriately, in saying that bringing all of these major CEOs to China is in and of itself a posturing from the United States that we want to walk out of here with a deal, and look no further than the types of industries that are represented by those that were on the steps of the red meeting.
This is just like, any sort of type of deal, whether you're going into a deal for economics, you're doing a deal as far as you want military in a conflict, and you want your opponents to surrender in some sort of a way, right? Because, even on the end of a business deal, they could be seen as your opponent, right? If they're going to concede to your negotiation points, that is a surrender in of its own way. So a lot of very similar parallels can be drawn between how we do things in business and how we do things through military conflict. And when you want your enemy or your opponent to essentially concede to the things that you want, whether it's an economic deal or a military deal, you definitely come with the greatest level of strength to posture in order to influence and sort of push them to concede to the things that you want. Did you hear that Xi straight up said to Trump that he's leading a week in America? I did not, but it doesn't surprise me.
In Dahuitang, which is the Mandarin, the English version is the Great Hall of the People. There were the images of that American delegation on the steps. And of course, in that first front row were all of the cabinet members. But on the second row, you did see some of those CEOs. Apple's Tim Cook was there. You also had Elon Musk representing Tesla. There were a number of Wall Street executives as well, from Goldman Sachs, as well as Citigroup. Jensen Huang, who is with NVIDIA. Obviously, artificial intelligence is a...
Well, there's definitely a group of people to that's definitely like an all-star team of just heavy hitters within the financial world. Obviously Elon Musk, number one, NVIDIA, number two, Tim Cook, everybody has iPhone, Apple products, especially in China, and BlackRock, which is, if I remember correctly, it's the biggest investing company in the world. I may be using the terminology slightly, but BlackRock definitely is yeah, those four. Yeah, all the money. I think combined in this delegation that he brought was easily over trillions of dollars. And I think actually that was accomplished just with these four.
Major part of these discussions as well, making a last-minute addition, had to join the president in Alaska to join Air Force One as part of a last-minute call, according to sources to me.
15 minutes?
But again, this is all about trying to get those deals done. As you point out, technology is a big one. China is one of the largest exporters of electronics goods, but as you point out, it shows how intertwined our two countries are.
Yeah, and then also, and there's a lot of things that go back to this, like China, because they do have such a huge population, it is a huge market. So like when Hollywood, there's a reason why Hollywood does a lot of different things, sort of adhering or to what China likes. For example, it's my understanding is that China essentially lets in 5 foreign films a year. And that's why you'll see in a lot of these movies that whether it's The Martian, the Transformers movies, that they will somehow involve China in the movie, in the sort of plot, and they always have to put them in a very good light. Let's say, as you saw in Train, especially like in The Martian. These are sort of the things that you need in order to be one of the 5 movies that's led into China. Because if you are, and you are one of the 5 movies that are led into China that year, that's huge because their market is so huge. There's so many people, and we've always been the culture center when it comes to entertainment and movies for the most part. So there's a lot of different things that go into how we have to. China is just it's a huge market, and that always has to be taken into consideration in business, the global economy, and a lot of other aspects.
That the Chinese love American products like Apple iPhones as well.
We thank you for watching.
All right. So obviously you want to get many different sides to this whole different things, right? So if you want to, anytime that you're watching any sort of news, if you're watching Fox, you need to jump on the other side and try to make sure that you're getting your news in everybody's single perspective. So, let's watch a little BBC.
What have we learned from Donald Trump's trip to China? Well, it's been more pageantry over policy, and Mr. Trump has reveled in it. From the military parades and the cheering children to being shown the roses in the Communist Party headquarters in the center of Beijing. But there have been very few announcements. Mr. Trump says China will buy 200 Boeing aircraft and billions of dollars of U.S. farm products. He also said Mr. Xi would help him end the war in Iran. The Chinese leader has pushed his counterpart to end arms sales to Taiwan, the self-governing island Bun. He also warned that it could be a source of conflict between the two superpowers. We also learned a little bit about the relationship between these two leaders. President Trump lavished praise on his host.
So this is one not really a surprise, because anytime that they're trying to do some sort of negotiations, each leader is going to push for the things that are the really big button issues for them. And Taiwan is probably one of the biggest issues when it comes to us, because we're really the only thing that's standing in their way of taking Taiwan. If the US was not really a thing and our military power wasn't necessarily a thing, China probably would have taken Taiwan already. But so, and then we'll get into this a little bit later about her particular comment about him pressuring Trump not to go into China, right? So there's a current arms deal. I think it's like 14 billion with the US and Taiwan. And as of this moment, that actually has not went through yet. But there's sort of like a indication, or not necessarily an indication, but a inference that based off of this meeting, he may not do it, which I don't necessarily think is the case. What I think is what's going to happen is Trump wants to deal with Iran first, and he might delay the signing of the weapons deal with Taiwan. But I think once the whole Iran and Strait of Hormuz situation is secured, I think that he will probably return to the issue of the weapons deal with the U.S. is possibly having with Taiwan.
He seems to admire the Chinese leader. President Xi was polite, but he may see a war-weakened U.S. leader seeking to do a deal. China was once eager to catch up with the West. After this visit, President Xi might believe he's on the verge of surpassing it.
So we're going to get into this a little bit later, and we're going to talk about China's economy, and there's a lot of common misconceptions about where because China's economy has been really strong in the past, but essentially they were taking a lot of shortcuts, and there's been a lot of things that China's economy has been affected to for quite a lot. Brandon Watchman, microchips are the new oil, however, controls Taiwan, controls the tech backbone of the world. And you're absolutely right, because it is one of the most important components that are constructed within the world. And Taiwan is, correct me if wrong, is the largest manufacturer of microchips in the world. So, all right. So let's get, I think this is an interesting take about the whole Taiwan situation.
No.
Wait, let me back this
To
up.
Taiwan following this summit. Picked up where Doug left off, the major issue of Taiwan. Did anything materially change with respect to Taiwan following this summit?
One word answer: no. It was very clear. Although Xi Jinping issued those very stark words, Secretary of State Rubio was very clear. U.S. policy has not changed. And so I think we're going to see very little in the way of China action on Taiwan. The problem here for Xi Jinping is that his military is not ready to invade, and the United States is standing firm. The people in Taiwan, they want good relations with Beijing, but they don't self-identify as Chinese. They see themselves as Taiwanese. I think the status quo will continue, and the status quo is great for the United States, it's great for Taiwan, and it's great for the free world.
So, this doesn't surprise me, because right now, with the situation with Iran and the oil that's going on, or because of prior to this conflict, China got 30% of their oil from Iran. And because of this conflict, they have had to, that has definitely hurt their economy a bit. And as a part of this deal, which we'll get into a little bit, one of the things that they made a deal with as part of this conference in Beijing is that the U.S. has actually agreed to, or that China has agreed to buy more oil from the U.S., which actually does two things. One, it lessens China's dependency on oil that comes out of essentially the Persian Gulf, which then also weakens the Iran, because their biggest bargaining chip is the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. And so this sort of kills two birds with one stone, which I think is, for the United States, is a big move. So it pulls China away from the dependency of Iran, pulls it towards us. So what very few allies and support that Iran still has, this deal of China buying more oil from us, it's a win-win in almost every aspect.
You mentioned Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about the United States' current stance when it comes to Taiwan. Here he is doing just that.
U.S. policy on the issue of Taiwan is
Our boy Rubio. This guy cracks me up.
unchanged as of today and as of the meeting that we had here today. It was raised. They always raise it on their side. We always make clear our position, and we move on to the other topic. I think China's preference is probably to have Taiwan willingly, voluntarily join them. We think it would be a terrible mistake to force that through force or anything of that nature. There would be repercussions for that globally, not just from the United States.
There was an $11 billion arms sale, Gordon, that was approved in December.
I apologize. 11 billion, not 14 billion.
Has not yet been fulfilled. Another $14 billion one that's awaiting approval. These weapons would be sold to Taiwan. I'm sure that one of Xi Jinping's goals was to make sure that this arms sale doesn't go through. So what does President Trump do here regarding these arms?
We're just going to have to wait and see. And that really is the answer for most issues following this summit. You know, Carly, most summits are canned. Everything is decided before the foreign leader arrives in Beijing. This one wasn't. There was actually work done in those discussions among Chinese and U.S. officials. So I think what we're going to see going on are a number of announcements on things. And one of them is that there will be an announcement on the new arms package at some point.
So if I had to predict this situation, I think that they're going to put the Taiwan, the arms deal to Taiwan, kind of push it down the road a little bit in order to solidify everything that's going on with the China and Iran situation. And then once that is more secured, would not be surprised if the United States came back to revisit the going forward with the Taiwan arms deal. So, but since we're on
the Chinese are very intransigent on a
So I wanted to get into a little bit more about China's economy here real quick. So one of the things, and let me pull this up real quick. All right. So China's economy, all right, we'll go over this. All right. So, all right. So China's economy has been facing a bit of a structural slowdown. There are major challenges, including persistent property sector crisis, a flagging of consumer spending, and an overcapacity. So, as far as the property downturn, there is a deepening crisis within their real estate sector. They've been having falling home sales and prices and basically erasing household wealth and been straining the local government finances. And there's been a big domino effect through a lot of different things. And you're going to see from this video we're about to watch about how the prices in China, like for goods and everything, have been dropping. And on face value, that seems like a good thing. But with everything, there's an action and there's an opposite reaction. And there is sort of a secondary effect, which isn't that great towards China's economy due to these product pricings. Because what ends up happening, I guess the easiest way is to put it is when product prices drop like that, which seems really good for the consumer, that's usually because there's less of a demand. And for that supply, and once you eventually want to turn that back on, that takes more time for it to get restarted. All right, so let's see. And then also another aspect of it too is, and then we kind of talked about this, is there's a weak consumption, which means the consumer confidence is low. And this is actually one of the things that's dropping the prices, but this has also a negative effect to it. Just because things are cheaper doesn't always mean it's a better thing. And yeah, and then also one of the two other big issues is they are facing high debt loads and a aging population because of some of the second and third order effects from the one child policy that China used to have. There is definitely some issues with their aging population and just the population in general. All right.
Your grocery bill is cheaper now than it was a year ago. That's if you live in China. In a
I'm
world
sorry.
that has spent...
I screwed that up. My bad. Give me 1 second. There we go.
Your grocery bill is cheaper now than it was a year ago. That's if you live in China. In a world that has spent the last few years drowning in inflation, that sounds kind of impossible. But in 2024, China's consumer inflation rate fell below zero for multiple months.
Which, when you think about like, oh, all the stuff, cars, phones, everything is getting cheaper, you're like, oh, this is great. But apparently that's not always the case.
Prices dropped even faster and kept falling for more than 2 straight years. New home prices declined in most major cities. Automakers slashed prices by double digits just to keep sales alive. On paper, it looks like an economic win. While households in the US and Europe struggled with rising prices, China appeared to be catching a break. Cheaper homes, cheaper cars, cheaper everything. At first glance, it feels like China found a loophole. But when
And so this is also something important to remember, that whenever you hear headlines within the news, that you have to, so just by this story, right? If you're looking at this, I easily could start a story with like how China's doing great because their prices are dropping and the United States is doing worse because our prices are going up. It's always, you have to look into things of why something is. And usually there's always like, for every pro, there's a con, and you have to get into there. And then that's the thing, is like, is whatever we're gaining from this situation worth sort of the long-term effects that are going to come as sort of on the opposite side of this thing, or sort of the reaction?
Prices fall across an entire economy at the same time, it usually means demand is disappearing. And when demand disappears, restarting growth becomes way harder than stopping inflation. But that is the problem China is now facing. Inflation hurts immediately. People feel it in rent, groceries, and energy bills. It creates frustration and anger. Deflation feels calmer.
Yeah, and that definitely sucked when, what I think was, what we peaked in 2021 with the highest inflation rate that we've ever had. What did it get up to? Like something like 12, was it like 9 or 12%? I forget exactly what it was. But yeah, that was crazy when like milk and eggs got super expensive, like especially the year after, or within the 2 years of COVID. That shit was crazy.
At first. When prices start falling, people feel patient. They feel like waiting makes sense. If you think a car will be cheaper in 6 months, you delay the purchase. If you expect home prices to keep dropping, you sit on the sidelines. Individually, that behavior feels rational. And across an entire economy, it feels dangerous. Spending slows, businesses notice weaker demand, hiring plans get postponed, wage growth flattens quietly rather than collapsing all at once. In China, this matters more than in many countries because household consumption accounts for less than 40% of China's GDP. In the US, it's close to 70%. China,
which is really a big deal because, there's a way to look at sort of like, this, we're going to the realm of macroeconomics, and having such a difference in the percentage of how China's household incomes as a part of their GDP versus ours means they have to approach their market completely differently.
relies far more on investment, construction, and manufacturing to drive growth. When consumers hesitate, there is less cushioning. Growth loses momentum faster. That hesitation is now visible in China's data. By mid-2024, China's official consumer price index slipped into negative territory. Prices were falling year over year. Producer prices were even weaker. Factory gate prices have been declining for more than 20 consecutive months, one of the longest deflationary stretches China has experienced in decades. Housing added more pressure. Seeing new home prices fell in roughly 2/3 of China's major cities last year. In several large urban areas, prices dropped more than 10% from their peak, and sales volume declined even faster. Car companies reacted quite aggressively here. Major Chinese automakers cut sticker prices by double digits, while some cut prices multiple times in a single year. And those
It sounds like we need to take a trip to China and go buy some cars, because dropping by double digits, that sounds pretty awesome. But yeah, you just because we always hear inflation, right? Because inflation has always been like a thing. The fact that China deals with really like deflationary issues based off of our life in the especially the United States, we deal with inflation so much that it's always a constant, and we almost never hear the term deflationary economy. And so it's interesting to see that. And of course, is that you have to understand why China's economy, obviously being a communist state, why things are essentially more focused towards investments and like real estate, governmental, of how essentially how the government invests in sort of their real estate, their infrastructure within the country over consumer spending.
moves weren't about promotion, but about survival. So when consumer prices, factory prices, and asset prices all fall together, the issue stops being affordability. It now becomes about confidence. Now, China's deflation problem didn't appear suddenly. It's actually been building up after years of imbalance. For decades, property was the backbone of China's growth.
So I actually want to go back to this photo, and we're going to see more of this. So I've actually been to China. I was in China for almost a month a number of years ago. And when you get on a train and you go anywhere in China, this is what every town outside of like your major metropolitan cities like Beijing, um, Shanghai, every town looks like this. And you'll drive by. And what it reminds me of, if you guys ever seen the movie um, Inception, when they go down into like whenever they show them the clips in the limbo, and they have these huge the cities that they built, which are all these like identical huge apartments, buildings, skyscrapers. That's what China looks like. And when you're just on a train just going past, like I went on a trip from Shanghai down to like the southwestern part of China to more a rural area. Every town that our train went by looks like this, almost identical. Yeah. And it reminded me of Inception and Limbo.
The backbone of China's growth. At its peak, real estate and related industries accounted for close to 30% of GDP. Homes were not just places to live, they were investments. Prices were expected to rise, developers borrowed heavily, local governments relied on land sales for revenue. But when that system broke, the impact was enormous. Major developers defaulted, construction slowed, projects stalled, buyers stepped back, and by the time prices started falling, household balance sheets had already taken.
So this is, you can get into this. So this is one of the issues when you don't let the consumer drive the economy and you actually let the government drive the economy, right? So that's kind of an overlying topic here of the difference of how the U.S. economy runs and versus how China's economy runs and who actually directs it.
China's housing market continued its downward trend in December. New home prices across 70 cities fell 0.4% month on month.
The property slump continues.
These ghost cities, or
deflation is harder to come from, same as stagnation, which Japan had for a long time, which is why government maintained healthy inflation percentage, which is mostly around 1.52%. Hexroy, you are actually exactly right. And actually one of, especially when I was doing research into this particular subject this last couple of days, is their biggest example of who also suffered this was Japan. So the question is Japan has their own issues, right? But Japan was able to recover from this a bit. And so the question is, will China be able to follow Japan's suit and essentially recover from this issue? But this also goes back into some other things, which is when this meeting with the United States coming to Beijing and sort of, the United States bringing, the head of all these amazing companies, CEOs who are just profiting, doing so well, it's a flex upon China because China's economy is not in the greatest place right now.
residential buildings without tenants or construction that never finished have become visual metaphors for the ongoing crisis.
And one of the sectors that is suffering the most is the property sector. Reports say China's home prices sunk for a 13th straight month in September as potential buyers hold a wait-and-see attitude.
Latest government reports showed an average price of new homes across 70 cities dropped 0.9% in July on month.
That damage carried over into spending decisions. At the same time, China's post-COVID recovery never fully arrived. See, the country reopened later than most economies, and policymakers expected consumers to just rush back. But instead, retail sales growth remained kind of quiet, consumer confidence stayed near historic lows, and saving rates remained high.
So this is one of the things to really, truly understand economics, macroeconomics. You have to understand human psychology. And when you get people to basically, to lose confidence within their economy or basically like spending, that loss of confidence may happen overnight, but that regaining of that confidence does definitely not happen overnight. And it takes a long time. And I think what someone already said is that it takes these types of for a deflationary economy, it takes it a long time to recover, and it has a lot to do with customer confidence returning, which takes way longer than people expect.
Youth unemployment surged at one point, exceeding 20% before authorities just stopped publishing the numbers. That uncertainty reshaped behavior because households shifted from spending to protecting what they had. Meanwhile, factories kept running. Industrial production continued to grow, capacity expanded, and supply kept rising even as demand softened. By 2024, China was producing more cars, electronics, and industrial goods than its domestic market could even absorb. And prices had to fall to clear the excess. Shopping malls in second-tier cities feel emptier than they used to. Discounts stop feeling temporary and start just feeling permanent. Promotions run so often that consumers stop believing full prices are even real. Car dealerships feel the pressure first. Prices fall to keep sales.
It's a good point. When if you're in that type of economy, which is essentially it's a buyer's economy and not a seller's market, it's a buyer's market. You could probably haggle down everything in that market, especially something that's like, and I don't understand how, every culture is different, but I bet you could probably haggle down car prices a lot there.
Moving, but profit margins shrink. Dealers worry less about making money on each car and more about keeping volume alive. But debt doesn't adjust. Household debt in China has risen sharply over the past decade, driven mostly by mortgages. Monthly payments stay fixed even as wages stall and asset values fall. So while goods become cheaper, people don't feel richer, they feel cautious. And caution spreads. Now, for China's leadership, deflation is not just an economic challenge, but it's a confidence problem, and it has political consequences. So now policymakers are actually aware of what prolonged deflation can do because Japan experienced it after its property bubble burst in the 1990s. And China wants to avoid repeating that experience. So the question is why China does not simply stimulate its way out of this problem. I mean, China has the tools, interest rates can fall, banks can lend, the government can spend, but stimulus only works if people are willing to spend the money they receive. But in a deflationary mindset, extra cash gets saved, not circulated. There is also structural concern.
That's interesting, because you have to think about it, try to put yourself in the shoes of those people, right? If you were in this already kind of type of economy and they're like, hey, we're actually going to put more money in your pockets, it makes sense that people would want to save it versus spend it, save that for a rainy day.
Here, China spent years dealing with excess leverage and property speculation. That forces policymakers to move cautiously. Now, when domestic demand weakens, companies often look outward. Exports become where the money is. In 2024, China's trade surplus expanded sharply even as domestic growth slowed. That's good news. Export volumes held up far better than consumption. And to stay competitive, companies lowered prices. And that adjustment matters globally because cheaper Chinese exports help consumers abroad, but they squeeze manufacturers in other countries. This is where deflation stops being China's internal problem and actually starts reshaping global trade. So this is where the debate starts to sound familiar. Because in the past, Donald Trump has repeatedly accused China of deliberately weakening its currency to make Chinese goods cheaper for foreign buyers. And the argument here was simple. A weaker yuan makes exports more competitive and hurts manufacturing elsewhere. It was in 2019 when the U.S. Treasury officially labeled China a currency manipulator. The label was later removed, but the accusation never.
Currency manipulator. That honestly sounds like it's interesting. Like that's what the the U.S. Treasury Department would call it. It actually sounds like that's something that Trump would use. Be like, he is a treasury manipulator. I wish I could do the Trump voice. I can't.
Really left public consciousness. But what is different today is how prices are adjusting. China is not aggressively devaluing its currency. The renminbi has weakened at times, but mostly within a managed range. Authorities have often intervened to slow depreciation, not accelerate it. Instead, falling domestic prices are now kind of doing the work. Factory prices have been declining for more than 2 years. Export prices have followed, and that makes Chinese goods cheaper globally, even without dramatic currency moves. From the outside, it looks like unfair competition, but but from inside China, it kind of feels like survival. Now, the timing of all this makes this especially sensitive. The United States and Europe spent the past couple years fighting inflation. China is dealing with the opposite problem because you have cheap electric vehicles, low-priced solar panels, steel, consumer electronics, tariffs are returning, political language is hardening. This is not just protectionism, it is a collision between economies moving in opposite directions. China is too large to ignore. Falling Chinese prices influence global inflation. China's deflation does not stay inside China, it moves through trade. So at first glance, even though falling prices feel like a massive gift, cheaper homes, cheaper cars, cheaper goods, but when an entire economy starts waiting instead of spending, cheaper stops feeling so good. That hesitation is the real risk that China is facing. And once hesitation spreads, restarting the growth becomes a lot harder than maybe stopping inflation ever was. I want to know what you think, so let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next.
All right, so that's I think that's interesting, just because of how it looks at how we perceive China, and which is, looking at it from an outsider perspective, but how does it look from inside China? Right? What are the effects that we are not necessarily seeing? So that's why I find this like a very interesting video, and that it also ties into obviously some of the motivations that were going into the Trump Beijing trip, which also then ties into what's going on in Iran.
Drive America forward for 250 years to come. If that's who you are, you should.
All right. So let's see here. All right. So one of the deals, let me see if I can find this. This is going to go into, okay, let's watch this. So from our boy, Max Afterburner. So he's going to talk about the oil situation here.
So now that you understand what has changed in the room with Beijing and the United States, you won't believe the full operational picture of what China is actually holding over Iran's head, because the numbers are genuinely staggering. Let's start with the energy math here. And this is what you need to know, because this is where China's leverage actually lives. China imports 11.6 million barrels of crude oil per day. That is a record high, and that was as of 2025. Iran's been supplying roughly 1.6 million of those barrels per day, often disguised through ship-to-ship transfers off of Malaysia and Indonesia to dodge U.S. sanctions. That is roughly 1 out of every 7 barrels China burns, delivered at a deep discount, because Iran has no other major buyers on the same level of China, because China is the biggest major buyer of that crude from Iran. But now here is what changed in the last few weeks. China resumed purchasing American crude at approximately 600,000 barrels per day. That's sweet Alaskan crude.
So yeah, so that's one. So before we actually did the blockade, we I think you may have said it was essentially 1.5 or 1.6 billion billion barrels a day, right? If I'm saying that term correctly, I don't know, I'm blowing a blank, but of crude oil. And since the blockade, we've able to restrict that to next to nothing. And now with the deal that went through as far as China and the United States about buying crude oil from us, once again, that helps us, but also takes their dependency, China's dependency off of Iran, which then weakens Iran, which helps us to further our goals and essentially actions within this particular conflict.
Or that sweet North Dakota or Texas crude is now being purchased on a higher level by Beijing, worth close to $10 billion per month at current prices. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping publicly told Trump that China opposes militarization of the strait and any Iranian attempt to charge tolls on shipping, which is huge. Beijing is speaking up against the IRGC at this point. So let me translate that.
So one, this sounds great, but also we have to take into consideration that, like with anything, like with Trump, anything that is said by any sort of political leader might be posturing, and there actually may be very little behind it. He may say that, but he may be saying that he's condemning what Iran's doing, but at the same time, with the other hand, maybe doing something to also continuously trying to help Iran. So I take anything that any world leader, including our own, with a grain of salt, and I think that's another healthy level of skepticism, especially when it comes to political leaders.
For you, Beijing is simultaneously paying Washington for more oil while publicly opposing the mechanism Tehran is using to grift the world and be the mafia bosses that are holding the global economy hostage. That's not neutrality. That is a slow motion defection, with China maybe removing themselves from the room, maybe exiting stage left when it comes to Tehran.
Which is actually one of the main goals of this conference within Beijing, because right now we're sort of bleeding out Iran. The only little life support that Iran has is China. So what we need them to do is essentially bleed out faster. So by doing this deal and sort of through the conference and a number of things that they talked about, they are setting up the situation where China, what little aid is they're giving Iran, they are able to basically reduce that aid, hopefully almost completely, and then that would that would expedite and speed up the process of essentially Iran's downfall, which is going to make them either one of two things: either they come to the negotiation table and they concede on the America's terms, or they get to the point where the Iranian population starts a revolution and rises up and takes essentially the government away from the IRGC.
Iran. But could China fully replace Iranian oil from other sources if it chose to fully chop off their dependence on Tehran? The answer, it's staggering, and it's a big whopping yes. But it's not overnight. Over a 6 to 12 month timeline, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Brazil, and Russia could absorb most of those barrels, along obviously with the United States. And China's strategic reserves are sitting at nearly 1.4 billion barrels as of late 2025, roughly 4 months of total import coverage. So China has the buffer. What it hasn't had is the political will until now. So on the ground in Tehran and in the Strait.
So yeah, so that goes back to, even if this, everything works out the way that we want it to, it's still going to take time. And because we've chosen not to do boots on the ground, and this tactic that we're using, which is essentially taking away all of Iran's external capabilities and then also restricting their economy to the point where it's going to fail if they don't concede, this all takes time. So that needs to be taken into consideration when looking at the situation, when analyzing it, and whether or not you're judging about whether or not this is a success or not. And I hear a lot of arguments where people are like, oh, should we be spending money on this? Is Iran really that much of a threat? Well, everybody has an opinion on everything, but I can tell you from my own personal and professional experience, Iran is a threat, not just to us, but the entire region. And we're not the only ones who feel this way, right? Even prior to this, the Gulf countries, the Gulf states, have not been a fan of Iran for different reasons. And then also, one of the best things that happened for us as far as support for this conflict was that when Iran started retaliating, they started striking indiscriminately to these other Gulf states. And now we have the UAE who's officially done actual offensive strikes in Iran. And I think I just saw that Italy finally sent some attack helicopters to the area. Super late, but at least they're sending something. So, all right. Now we're going to get into our boy 2CTV. You and Max should do a video together. That would be cool. I think it's cool to find interesting. I've seen Max Afterburn prior. One, I saw that especially now that he's doing a lot of current affairs content. I saw that he was a big gamer, and I think that's actually how his channel started, if I remember correctly, which I am also an avid video game player. I just have not played in a while. Eventually, I want to get to the point where this channel gets big enough that I can branch off and also do a gaming portion of this channel. That's the true Dean right there. All right, so let's see our boy Tusi. We're anti-IRGC media guy, so that's always to take in memory. This guy is very obviously pro-Iranian diaspora, very anti-IRGC. So understand anybody's bias before we start listening to them and we hear what they have to say.
Let's go to the situation with the Kurds, because the Kurdish separatists in Iraq who hate the Iranian people recently took weapons from President Trump. President Trump said, you need to give these weapons to the Iranian people so that they can fight against the IRGC. The Kurdish separatists stole most of the weapons. Some of the weapons went to Iran. Most of them were stolen by the Kurds. President Trump recently said that he's not happy.
So I have actually talked about the Kurds. I remember at the beginning of this conflict, and I made a video about it, about the opposition groups, that people were like, oh, the Kurds are going to come in, they're going to help, they're going to do all these different things. And I said, and especially because I've dealt with the Kurds, yeah, they're not doing much other than causing a distraction. One, because, oh man, if you saw some of the videos that they were putting out, like, you know, the training videos that some of these groups put out is just comical. But they don't have the manpower, they don't have the logistical support to even really invade Iran. They can cause issues, but they are like many cultures within the area. Probably they're one of they care about themselves, which, you know, anybody can understand. Like, you know, it's your life, you're the one living in it. You got to put yourself forward. But almost all these groups, these tribes, these nations, these cultures, they're going to do what's best for them. And if you give them a bunch of weapons and then ask them to go risk their lives against another country, you know, it's not the biggest surprise that they're like, no, we're just going to keep the weapons. That's probably the shitty part. But I, from the very beginning, was like, you're not really going to get anything to the Kurds, just because, yeah, logistically, they just don't have the ability to, or the manpower. And honestly, the experience, if you understand the Kurds and their history of their conflicts, they don't really, their heart's in the right place, but they're not really that effective at winning, right? They did really well in Syria. Unfortunately, we made them give everything back, but that's a whole nother story.
Happy with the Kurds. And once again, he said they have disappointed us. The Kurds take.
No weapons, they have no guns.
Obviously, this is now him saying this after the fact, but I'm sure prior he was actually saying like, oh, the Kurds are great, we're going to give them weapons and they're going to do great. And, you know, you got to be careful with and we had to deal with this for decades when on the global war on terrorism, is whenever you deal with these groups, right, you have to kind of go into it that they may betray you, or they are definitely not going to do what they say they're going to do, because there's all these, like, especially when you're talking to these commanders and these representatives, they're going to have this very flowery speech of like, oh, you and I, we're going to become successful in this conflict, and then our children are going to live in peace and they're going to hold hands together. And then you'll hear the term inshallah, right? If God wills it. And this is a common term that they use, and it's also a common term that we make fun of, because whenever you're like, hey, you tell like an Iraqi commander, like, hey, I need you at this location at this time so we can do on this hit, and he'll be like, inshallah, right? What that basically means is like, hey, I'll be there if God wills it, which is essentially him giving already a proactive excuse that he's not going to show up on time, right? Or not be there, or not do what he's supposed to do. And this was a common thing that we have to deal with all the time, specifically in some of these cultures, specifically Iraqi culture. And that sort of does extend to the Kurds. Maybe not quite as bad, but it is definitely a issue or something that you need to understand within the culture. of that region.
We thought the Kurds were going to give us weapons, but the Kurds disappointed us. The Kurds take. They have a great reputation in Congress. Congress says, oh, they fight so hard. No, they fight hard when they get paid. So I'm very disappointed in the Kurds. But
this is all kind of true. But the thing is, they're like most cultures they're very self-serving. They're going to do what's best for them. They saw an opportunity. They took the weapons, and I would caution anybody to think that this is the only group that we gave weapons to. I guarantee you it's not. So this is definitely not the end of the world. And the Kurds are probably, of all the opposition groups, probably one of the, I would say, least effective. Yeah, and they're not going to be doing what we really want them to do. And then one of the issues of the opposition groups, let's just say in a perfect world, the opposition groups were able to band together and helped overthrow the IRGC. That's not what the Iranian people want, because all the opposition groups, I guarantee you, including the Kurds, would definitely like to slice off a piece of Iran for themselves. And that's not what the greater population of Iran wants.
They were given, I said it wasn't going to work, by the way.
Yeah. So so Hexor, the Kurd opposition groups are mostly separatists, the ones outside Iran, which fundamentally conflicts with the Iranian people, especially the ones outside Iran. You're right, but I believe, and this is my understanding of, we never wanted the opposition groups. One, nor could they, nor do we ever expect them to be like, okay, they're invading and they're going to Tehran. Like, that was never going to happen. But what we needed them to do was to act as distractions, tying up Islamic Republic security forces, so that we could essentially be, if we were giving weapons, like we had CIA guys, tier 1 guys on the ground who are acting as advisors and supplying weapons to, loyal, essentially members who are opposed to the Islamic Republic, that would be good. And then having opposition groups tying up the security forces allow us to essentially operate more freely. And if there ever was going to be a revolution that was led by maybe the members of the community in the Artesh who are opposed to the Islamic Republic, that essentially helps to breed the best chance, right? Because this is one, not an easy concept of a objective to accomplish. It would definitely have to be a coordinated event, but all these different things where they're all different ideas of tactics and how we implemented them is, everybody comes in with an idea of how this is going to go. And like with any conflict, it does not necessarily go the way that you want it to, right? The famous Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. So all this stuff, combat, battlefield, is always an ever evolving thing. And every operation never goes the way that you plan it. That is a fact of life.
I just have to say it. I disagreed with what they did. They gave it. I said, they'll never get there. And I was right. I like to be right. In this case, too bad. But we sent some guns with ammunition, and they were supposed to be delivered, but they kept it. I said, they're going to keep it. But what do I know? I've only been doing this a short period of time. What do I know? Go ahead.
Essentially, this is the second time he's mentioned that he's a little bit angry.
All right, so we're going to go forward a little bit.
To know that President Trump is coming and is angry and is going to have words with the president of the commies. Essentially, the US government have now sanctioned 3 Chinese firms because they were feeding the Islamic Republic satellite intel on the US bases and US forces in the region. Perfect timing. The State Department.
So yeah, this is also another thing. So one of the reasons that we have that China has been assisting Iran is that we have taken out majority of their command and control. We have what little ability they have to even see inside the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz was almost completely taken out. what the only reason that they're even getting any sort of intel, have any idea where boats are being moving, is because China and Russia are helping in this particular regard, and they're actually feeding them intel. So that's actually the only reason why they even know where our ships are, because through their own capabilities and communications networks and different types of detection capabilities have been greatly either completely destroyed or greatly reduced. China is actually the one helping them do it and feeding them intel. There's also evidence of Russia doing it as well.
Parliament has now sanctioned these companies because during Operation Epic Fury, the US bases were targeted in a very specific way, and they knew something was wrong. The targets are Earth Eye, Mizar Vision, and Changguana. These are the satellite technology companies. Essentially, at this point, they're saying that if the Chinese were not helping the IRGC, the US bases, the US forces in the region would have had an easier time. And despite the fact that China continued to deny the allegations that they were helping the IRGC, everybody knew they were helping them. This time round, perfect timing. The US government made this announcement just as President Trump was on his way to Beijing. It's going to be a very, very awkward conversation, let's just say, between the two leaders. And obviously, there's going to be a big conversation about the... has now said that...
So I love this. So if anybody doesn't know, this is Mojtaba Khomeini, who's the son of the previous supreme leader. And he's the one who got injured in that first strike, and we have yet to see him. And I think I showed everybody a video of him in, I think it was Mashhad, a town in Iran, where they put up this huge picture of everybody who's died in the conflict, and they had Mojtaba as one of his pictures. And they, even though we've never seen him, they still claim that he's alive. And so Tusi keeps calling him the cardboard Ayatollah.
The Islamic Republic will no longer negotiate with the United States unless President Trump surrenders to 5 red lines and demands before even discussing anything around nuclear. The demands include
the fact that Iran is still like trying to demand things, that they have zero power or ability or even sort of negotiation leverage, is just, it just goes back to their level of, you know, it's either one of two things. Either these guys are like nuts and they're not very smart and they definitely lack some level of logic, or that they are smarter than we think they are and they're actually playing this to the best situation they can. They're actually trying to delay it somehow, which I don't think it was probably the former, because even if they were using this to delay the process, time is not on their side. Their economy is a ticking time bomb.
Ending the war before even negotiating the nuclear deal across the whole region. So not just the Americans, but also Israelis defending their countries against Hezbollah and Hamas. They also demand that the Americans lift all sanctions on Iran, releasing frozen Iranian assets, and of course, as usual, pay reparations for war damages. And finally, recognizing that the Strait of Hormuz is under new management, the IRGC will be in full control. Okay.
Which, mind you, that was not the issue. That was not their, when Iran was at its height of its power, probably right before this conflict, they didn't even have full control of the Strait of Hormuz. They just had control over the 13.8 miles off of their coastline, and everything else was international waters. But now they want more. Now they want full control over it. And just going back to thinking that you could even, and anybody would ever agree to this, based off of when their military has been pretty much depleted, especially the Air Force, Navy, and ballistic missile programs, which is their external arm of their military, because we don't have to worry about the Army doing much in the water. It's just nuts that it's just interesting that these people are so disconnected with reality, or just, maybe they're just not all that smart. It could be a lot of different things. But it's interesting to see how off base these guys are.
So nothing has changed really. The only thing that's basically changed is until now, the Islamic republics were perceived as that they were trying to stall this and buy some time.
Yeah. So, Bruno, that you're actually right. So he says, what are we seeing is the industrialization of asymmetric warfare, Iran perfected cheap. So this is, we're going to get into this a little bit when we start talking about drone warfare. And drone warfare is one of the examples of is military power and military technology will advance in a certain way, but we might get these really awesome, cool ideas, these cool fighter jets, tanks, whatever. But at the end of the day, it comes down to money. And how much money does it cost to make a particular product, vehicle, tank, weapon system? And then you do sort of economy. You weigh the economy of, if you are opposing somebody else, like how much money does it cost to defeat that weapon system? And so you really end up fighting sort of a war on a bit of a balance sheet. For example, how much does a missile cost versus how much does a F-22 cost? And they actually went through this in Vietnam, because the F-4 Phantom, which was the new air superiority fighter for the United States, was actually not originally designed with a gun. It was just missiles. And they actually had a couple pilots who bolted essentially a gun to the aircraft and then went down and shot a bunch of MiGs. And they actually convinced the state, the Department of Defense, to put guns back on F-4s, because it only cost them a couple, like $1,000 worth of ammunition from the guns versus hundreds and hundreds of thousands for the missiles. So this is, wars are fought through industry. So this is always something that has to be taken into account. And one of the natural progressions of that is like, how can I deliver a payload for the cheapest amount of price? And what we've come across is being able to do that as far as like both money and actual human capital, and how easy it is to train, because it's much easier to train a drone pilot than it is to train an actual pilot, which also the aircraft and the training of the pilot, all that costs more. It's more money. So if you can do it cheaper, that's how war is going to progress. That's how it's always been. And drones is definitely one of the things that's kind of, we're headed towards, that is drone warfare, and it becoming a much bigger part of it. We've already seen how big of it is in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And we just recently saw that Russia just launched the largest drone strike in the history of pretty much the world. So we're going to watch this video. So this is, all right, well, first, before we get into that, let's cover. All right, so let's talk about a bit about drone warfare revolution, or evolution, if you will. Okay. So the biggest shift in warfare right now is not hypersonics or stealth aircraft. It is the mass proliferation of cheap drones and the collapse of the cost curve in modern combat. A $300 to $5,000 FPV drone can now destroy vehicles worth of millions, because everything just comes down to money. This changes military economics, force protection, logistics, and honestly, even criminal violence. So the recent conflicts have shown that drones are just no longer just ISR tools, because that's how they were. Like especially because I was on my first deployment in 2007, and I can tell you that, one second. So I can tell you that whenever we thought of drones, it was just ISR platforms. There were a few that had a couple Hellfires and stuff like that, but that was, that was that wasn't as that common, right? If you wanted airstrikes, you actually had manned pilots doing airstrikes. The drones carrying weapons was more of kind of like suddenly they had a target moving and there was no time for a fast mover, some sort of aircraft to get there to do the strike. And that's at that time, that's what we sort of used the payloads on the drones for, was kind of like your emergency last ditch effort sort of thing. So recent conflicts have shown that drones are not just ISR tools. They're now precision strike systems, artillery replacements, airborne mines. Seen a lot of that lately. Surveillance networks, psychological weapons, because of when you get so many of these drones and you now know their capabilities that they could just come and find you, it screws with these guys' heads. We see this in both in videos that are coming out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And Ukraine has obviously become the clearest example of this transformation. Their Ukrainian FPV drones have been costing a few $100s, have destroyed tanks, artillery systems, and even expensive defensive air assets. Ukraine is now producing drones at industrial scale and integrating AI, autonomous targeting, and decentralized battlefield networking and warfare, which, going into AI targeting, that is a whole other issue and topic that we will eventually discuss. So going back and forth of this, and we actually knew this was not a huge surprise. We actually knew that this was eventually how it was going to be. And I remember this was in 2012, I was visiting Delta Force, and we were in the intelligence spaces with command elements, and we were discussing what we thought the battlefield was going to look like, the future battlefield. And we guessed that it would basically be special operations forces with drones fighting other special operations forces with drones, like basically your Green Berets, your Delta Force with drones fighting Spetsnaz with drones. And that's basically we'd be fighting each other, but never actually ever seeing each other physically. We'd be just killing each other with drones. So we predicted this, over 15 years ago. And then when the Russia-Ukraine conflict happened and we saw the use of drones being basically, it's kind of what we predicted. The only thing we didn't quite predict was how ineffective the Russian military was. We actually give it way more credit than it was due, which that causes a whole nother other issues based off of if Russia's doing so badly that they could use nuclear weapons, because it's always been a bit of a concern. So all right. And so what exactly does this mean? So that means that the future battlefield likely becomes partly anonymous, AI assisted, decentralized, heavily electronic warfare contested, and it's just honestly saturated with like low cost, very affordable systems. And especially when you're a military like us, who has a lot of really expensive, nice, super capable systems, just kind of like how it was really hard for us to fight these low-tech insurgents with our high-tech weaponry. The same issues become apparent when fighting, if you were to fight an entire military that fights everything with drones, because essentially they could outspend you if you were on the same levels. If you were fighting a nation who had the same level economy, the one who is essentially using cheaper stuff to kill your more expensive stuff, I guarantee you, is the one who's eventually going to win, or has the highest probability to succeed in that conflict. So let's see. So there's, so that this changes infantry tactics. So we have to now think about camouflage, concealment, deception, mobility, dispersion. Electronic discipline are becoming critical again, because you're no longer having to hide from human eyes. You're having to hide from essentially whatever the capabilities on these drones are, especially when the ones that come to the AI autonomous ones. Because it's one thing when you have a guy or a pilot who's operating these things. It's another when it's an AI autonomous targeting system. So let's see. So this attack that just happened, was over 1,500 drones, and it was roughly over a 2-day period against Ukraine, combined with dozens of missiles. Some reports roughly 650 plus drones and 56 missiles in a single overnight strike along targeting Kiev and other cities. So it was total 1,500 over 2 days. These missiles and strikes hit Kiev and multiple regions simultaneously. Apparently, there were these attacks happened in 14 different areas. So 14 different regions were all part of these strikes over 2 days. And most of them were the Shahed style drones that Iran has. They're like these one-way attack drones. They have a specific sound, and they also use decoy drones. They use cruise missiles. They basically fought a whole majority of munitions and weapons, but majority of it were the Shahed style drones. And the goal was not just for precision targeting. They wanted to overwhelm air defenses and overwhelm the resources. So because the air defenses have to use their munitions and capabilities in order to take down all these drones. So they're also trying to bleed out the Ukrainians. So there's a couple different, we believe, tactical goals within this particular huge drone airstrike. So, but Ukraine has adapted faster than most militaries ever expected. Ukraine now treats drones as reconnaissance platforms, precision strike platforms, airborne artillery, logistics tools, and battlefield networking systems. So Ukraine's military is basically focused around drones now, which is, it's probably going to see a lot of nations' militaries go that way as well. So, and to be honest, our focus towards drones will probably strengthen our drone capability. I already know that one of the systems that they want to design for the Air Force are drones to be wingmen for fighter aircraft, because they can essentially, they're like cheaper than the missiles that are being fired at us your different aircraft, your F-22s, your F-35s. And if you can essentially put up drones that cost cheaper than the missiles that are being shot at them, and they have the same profile as far as an aircraft, then they can be used to protect our actual the actual expensive aircraft. And then that's kind of a way to combat this sort of warfare through economic means. So I would definitely predict in the future the United States military is going to focus more on drones. And Ukraine has, similar to how Ukraine has, we're never going to make it like solely our main focus, kind of like how Ukraine has, but we're definitely going to increase our capabilities, and we're probably going to see a lot more drones in the future of the United States military.
Russia launched a massive drone attack on Ukraine, firing at least 800 drones across 20 regions of the country. This comes as Kremlin demanded Ukraine to cede territories claimed by Russia, which, according to Moscow, would open a corridor towards peace talks. The Ukrainian capital of Kiev came under a heavy aerial attack as the country's air defenses intercepted several Russian projectiles. Kiev's Air Force said that Russia launched 675 drones and 56 missiles at Ukraine.
So going back to the Hexor, does the asymmetry also apply to Islamic Republic ballistic missiles versus Patriot interceptors? And can the regime produce lots of them during ceasefire, getting supplies through the Caspian Sea? So this is a very good question. So this is where it goes back to my comment about this definitely helps. Where this really becomes an issue is when the two nations that are fighting this conflict are very similar on economic capabilities and reserves. Because if you're not, if there's a huge disparity, which there is between the United States, is fortunately for us that we have the capability to essentially use more expensive weapon systems to take out theirs. And that's fine within this particular conflict because we can afford it. We can outspend them, you know, I don't know what the number would be, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1, right? But this is a lesson to be thought of and considered and analyzed for future conflicts, because what happens if we go to war with China, right, who has much a closer power economically to us, and let's just say China decided to go fight everything through drones and essentially everything that we took out essentially. So that's something that needs to be in consideration. Luckily with the Iran thing, with Iran, it doesn't really matter because we can outspend them so much, and then we have done such a good job taking out their stuff, and their economy is on the verge of collapse. So that the Iran-ish thing is not necessarily an issue just because we have the capability to outspend them, but this definitely needs to be taken in consideration for future conflicts against nations who are much closer to us in economic power.
Residential building partially destroyed in the aerial assault. Authorities say that several residents could be trapped under the rubble following the overnight strikes. Earlier, Ukrainian authorities claimed that Russia is deploying Shahid drones in a tactic aimed at overwhelming the country's air defenses, while drones targeted the cities of Lviv and Odessa as well. Visuals that you see on your screen show firefighters extinguishing multiple blazes in buildings and conduct rescue operations in the city of Odessa. Ukraine's deputy prime minister said that Russian strikes hit ports and railway infrastructure in Odessa.
Oh yeah, so I did see that they were not only just trying to overwhelm the air defense or their defense structure, but they were actually targeting infrastructure, because if you target rail lines and stuff, because that's how a lot of supplies and munitions, troops, vehicles are moved, is actually through rail lines. So if you're able to disrupt that, then you can inhibit your opponent's ability to wage war, because of their supply lines are then affected. So, okay. Then if we go on to more discussions about drones, let's go back real quick. All right, let's see how much time before. All right, does anybody have any questions? Let's see. Brunel, we are transitioning from industrial warfare to hyper-automated decentralized combat. Decide with the best code and the cheapest mass production win. Absolutely. That's definitely going to be a huge factor, especially when you are nations who are similar within resources and economic power. Okay. All right. So I think that unless anybody has any questions, I think we're gonna call it there. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and you guys will see me on the regular now that I've officially have in partnership with a media company that's going to help me produce and edit all my content. So if you guys have not already, if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. Hit that notification bell, because sometimes based off some of the content that I do, YouTube may or may not recommend it to you, but if you hit that notification bell every single time that I post something, you guys will see it. And the more that you guys are able to come in, like the videos, comment, and honestly give me suggestions on how we can improve the content, the subjects, the topics, would be extremely helpful, because as I want to grow this channel, I want to do kind of concentrate on not only just stuff that I like to talk about, but also stuff that people want to hear about. And what little, if I can lend my expertise or my experience to that particular subject, I will do so. So I appreciate everybody. Let's see if we get another question. How quickly you think Iran ends now China's stacking against Iran? It's a good question. So I think that this definitely expedites the process. It's really hard to say how long it will take, but I'll give you a number. It will probably probably speed up the process probably by like 30%. So if we thought that Iran's economy would come down to full collapse in 90 days, that may help it to drop it to like 2 months. So it's definitely going to increase it, but it's not, that's probably, if I had to make a prediction, I think that we are within 90 to 60 days of a full Iranian economic collapse, and either they're going to concede to our demands, or you'll probably see a large revolution within the country itself. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody, and I will talk to you all later. You guys have a lovely day.